People do not leave bad jobs. They leave bad managers. If that is not 100% true, I don't know what is. So many of us have found ourselves where a toxic manager just pushes us to the brink of a meltdown. And if you have found yourself in the same exact situation, you are not alone. In this episode, we are going to go through exactly what to do to overcome a toxic manager so that you can finally regain control of your work life. Welcome back to Organized Chaos. My name is Regan, and I am so very happy that you all are here. Toxic managers are an ugly, unavoidable part of life, and they are my Roman Empire. If I could talk about one thing, if someone said to me, you have to go give a 10-minute presentation right now, what do you want to talk about? I would talk about the impact that a toxic manager can have, not only on your life, the rest of your career, your overall job satisfaction, but everything else in between. Sometimes toxic managers are toxic by choice, others by accident, but either way, it does not diminish the impact that they have on your life. What is the most toxic thing that you have ever experienced with a manager? I cannot decide when I was scripting out this video if it's between the manager who once berated me for calling him a quote liar, which I absolutely did not do, when I called out that his actions and his words did not mix, they were not aligned, or if it was the other boss who, when I had a sample client gift delivered to my desk, walked by and said, "Why are we giving out notebooks? We should just be sending them strippers." Both of those situations definitely did not make me feel good, nor did they make me want to work, did not increase my engagement. If anything, it increased my dislike of them. So toxic managers, especially in today's workforce, are so pervasive. Talk to any of your friends, and I'm sure they will have a handful of toxic behaviors, of toxic stories that they can relay to you. And they are absolutely everywhere in corporate America and abroad. But I promise you, you are so much more than the toxic manager that you have likely come across in your career. In no way, shape, or form are you required to deal with their bullshit. You always have a choice. You always have a choice of how you handle them. You always have a choice of how you allow them to talk to you. And you always have a choice as to whether or not you want to continue working in that individual place. But I hear you, you might be saying, oh, there's no way that I can manage my toxic manager. I'm stuck in this position. This is the only position for me right now. This is going to be great for my career trajectory. So if you are sitting there curious how the hell you are going to continue to deal with your toxic boss without having a fucking meltdown, this episode is the right place for you. The first thing that I want to start off with, though, is to clarify something, a little bit of a disclaimer, so to speak, because there is a difference between a toxic boss and a cultural difference. And I think this is one point that's incredibly important to highlight because different cultures communicate differently. And if you're sitting there and thinking to yourself, well, if my boss is not communicating in the way that I am used to for my culture, then they are, quote, toxic, that may not be true. And so you might need to go and handle them in a different way, or at least change your frame of mind. We'll go through in a second how you can truly identify a toxic manager, but I wanted to clarify that toxicity is not a difference in culture. In fact, these things are incredible for businesses. It means that you get different frame of minds, different thought processes, different backgrounds, all creating products and services that are truly going to serve your target market. So for example, an American, which I'm very used to the American working culture, is going to use words and phrases that are called softeners. They're going to use things like, when they give feedback, could you maybe do this differently? We probably should do this instead. They're going to couch everything. They're going to sugarcoat it. Whereas if you're working with a French person, they're going to be so much more direct because they value clear, concise, direct feedback. As an American, and I have run into this multiple times, that can feel jarring. But there's a difference, again, between toxicity and a difference of culture. While we should all strive to be culturally aware and shift our communication styles in favor of the culture that we are currently talking to, it's also unrealistic to believe that we are going to be able to just totally throw everything that we know and love out the window. So recognize that the next time you feel yourself get a little bit triggered in a conversation, think to yourself, is this toxicity Or is this something that I can handle by understanding that this is just a difference of culture? But that being said, there are so many cases of toxic managers that I'm sure if you're feeling it, if you're feeling like, wow, I am so like feeling icky after every single conversation I have with this individual, let's talk about how you can identify a toxic manager and what you could do when you are inevitably faced with one. Because toxicity comes in many forms. And the primary sign is how you feel when you walk away. So when you have a conversation with them, I want you to really pay attention to how you're feeling as you start to walk away. If you're not feeling listened to, if your career is feeling stifled, if you're feeling any sort of jealousy emanating from your manager, if you're feeling micromanaged, or if you feel like they're telling you one thing and then they go and do another, you are likely dealing with a toxic manager. Now, if you've encountered any other form of toxicity, please send me a note because I'm always curious what else is out there. This is based on my experience in the research that I've done, and it feels like I've encompassed them into 4 different groups of toxicity. The first might surprise you, but I call this one the toxic positivity. This is the manager where whenever you talk to them, everything is great. They're typically bubbly, they're typically pretty well liked, so this can be a hard one to identify. Toxic positivity doesn't allow you to sit and work through problems in a way that is productive, cohesive for your career, for the project that you're working on. It ultimately stifles you because you don't feel psychologically safe to have these tough conversations. A toxically positive manager, so somebody who just does not understand how to have the emotional intelligence in order to support or contain you through the struggles that you're having, won't allow you to talk about interpersonal conflict at work. They won't allow you to raise any concerns or feedback that you might have for them, because everything is great, everything is wonderful, and everything will always work out. Where that may actually be true, what's important is to recognize that we are all humans at work and we experience a vast variety of emotions. And sometimes as a manager, it is our role to talk through each one of those with you. We are not therapists, but we are required to support you. If you move into a management role, be prepared to support your team. Your role as a leader is not to control, it is to support. That's 90% of what you do. The second archetype of a toxic manager is the ghost. This is the person you can never find. This is the person who says, oh, I'm going to be available for this meeting, but then pushes it back because they're, quote, so busy. This could also be combined with the toxically positive manager, so the toxic positivity. Typically, I see these two combined, but honestly, all of these different types of managers could end up being the ghost. But a ghosting manager is just as harmful as a micromanager because the ghosting manager is not giving you the feedback, the strategy, or the priorities necessary in order for you to make decisions for your job. Many times, your job is not to look at the high-level strategy, it's to look at the strategy that you are dealing with on your level. And so if you don't have a manager there that is setting the high-level strategy or the high-level priorities, how are you meant to truly decide and make informed decisions for yourself? That is only furthering the harm to your own career and not helping you. It may feel like, oh, I'm so happy that I don't have a micromanager and I would so much rather have a ghost than a micromanager, which is kind of true, but they're equally as harmful. But then I'll move on to the micromanager because that's pretty self-explanatory. A micromanager typically does so because they are lacking control in many other areas of their life. And so really this just comes from a place of insecurity for themselves. Many of these do. A micromanager can make you feel like you don't know how to do your job or they don't trust you. All of these things are detrimental to your career and your relationships at work, which are super important, as we know from last week's video. And then finally, number 4, we have the dick. This is the straight up toxic boss that I think most people think about. This is the boss that says comments to you that are just so out of pocket. This is the boss that wholeheartedly does not understand DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the boss that probably has hired a handful of their friends. This is the boss that every single time you leave, you think to yourself, wow, you're an ass and we would not be friends outside of work. This is the boss that uses radical candor just to be a dick. Now, this is a really great point to kind of pivot off of the archetypes because I wanted to touch on radical candor in this episode because toxic managers typically use this as an excuse for their behavior. Now, Kim Scott wrote Radical Candor, and if you've not read it yet, it's definitely in my books of self-development, self-help, organizational culture books that you absolutely need to read. In Radical Candor, Kim Scott puts it on this quadrant that is measured based on how much a manager personally cares about you versus how direct and honest they want their communication to be. And Radical Candor ends up sitting in the upper right-hand corner, surrounded by all of these different types of communication that typically align to the different archetypes that I outlined earlier on. You can see this excuse for radical candor in the micromanager. You can see it in the toxically positive one. You can see it in the ghost, because the difference between radical candor and everything else is in how much a manager truly cares about you and your development. Radical candor is a deep understanding of you and your abilities. Radical candor is understanding and caring about you and the betterment of your career. Radical candor is having clear, concise, and specific communication with you and your team members. Radical candor is not shaming you, making you afraid of them. It is not berating you. It is not manipulation. It is not insincere communication or praise. And it is most certainly not sugar-coated criticism, because you can see that in all the different manager archetypes that I outlined above. Now, a big disclaimer that I'm going to add in here is not a single person in this world. No one is perfect. Nobody, not even you, knows exactly what to do at every moment in time. So the real crux here of a toxic versus a non-toxic manager is somebody who has the emotional intelligence and the willingness to learn, because a willingness to learn makes all the difference. Nobody is just born with emotional intelligence. Nobody is born with the immediate leadership skills or management skills necessary in order to build a team and grow a team. It is so difficult, and I do want you to understand this, to focus on your own career and the career of your teammates. And it takes a really specific personality in order to focus on that. But the good managers, the managers who do that, those are the ones to follow. Those are the golden goose eggs, so to speak, that you want to go and find and hitch your wagon to. Those are the ones that are going to help you propel your own career in the same way that you are going to help theirs. How you define the character of your manager, that's what's most important here. They can have a bad day, they can't be a bad person. And so remember that the next time you get frustrated or annoyed. This happens all the time. The difference is in who they are at their core. Now, handling a toxic boss can be super complicated. And I never ever want you to feel like you have to bend over backwards in order to please anybody. There's a difference between managing up and protecting yourself and compartmentalizing your true personality to the point of no return. Whatever advice I'm about to give, I want you to remember to handle all of this with confidence. You are not wrong for asking to be treated like a human being. You are not wrong for advocating for yourself. You are allowed to do every single thing that you need to do in order to salvage the relationship with a toxic manager. Equally, you deserve to work with teams that support you, that treat you with respect, and who value your work. Remember that. So how to deal with them. The first thing in the how to deal with them process is remember it's about them, it's not about you. As I said earlier on, so many managers do not have the emotional intelligence necessary in order to lead a team. And try to remain neutral, as hard as it is. Managers will say things left and right, especially the toxic ones. It may, on their side, be directed towards you, but it's almost never an accurate depiction of your character. So use that empathy and understanding to your advantage. Really lean on your empathy muscle. Now, this is hard. Don't get me wrong. I know how hard it is to sit and try to see something from a manager's point of view, to see them as a human when all you want to do is just get angry and mad and spit things right back at them. I would caution you against that because it almost never works in your favor. At the end of the day, companies are hierarchical. They're going to do what they're going to do. They are going to make decisions based on the information that they have at hand. And when they put somebody into a leadership position, they almost never look further than that. It is rare unless you get an entire team coming up and saying this person is toxic, which again is rare. They're almost never going to do anything to really change the situation. So your job as an individual, as an adult, is to make the choice, is to choose how you are going to respond. So remember, it is about them. It is not about you. The second way that you can choose how to respond yourself is to think about and maybe reevaluate your work priorities or how you view your relationship with work. We've talked about this in the last couple of episodes. We've gone through vacation. We've gone through work-life balance. We've gone through how to reevaluate success. I've gone through how to set your goals. I have so many examples of further reading and learning that you can do on how to develop this resilience and really develop this relationship with work in a way that is going to be sustainable for you. Because we spend over 90,000 hours at work. You have to be doing something that you actually enjoy. Do not allow yourself to get sucked down into a bad situation that's only going to turn worse if you continue to compartmentalize your emotions, if you continue to allow someone to treat you like crap, and if you continue to allow yourself to have warped priorities and a warped perspective on what success looks like in your career. Now, success can look a ton of different ways. In this situation, if you have a toxic manager, my suggestion to you is to take a look at, how do I want to perceive my career right now? Because you need to make a decision. Do you either want to continue working with this toxic manager or leave? Like, how do you want to handle it? A great first way to do it is by stepping in and saying, okay, what does success look like in my career for me right now and in 5 years? Will I be able to achieve this right now or in 5 years if I continue to sit in this position? How much does this manager impact my life? Is there a way for me to not spend time with this person? Is there a way for me to avoid them? Is there a way for me to only come into contact with them in a way that is going to feel safe and secure for me? These are all great questions that you can ask yourself so you can start to establish boundaries around work and the experiences you have while at the office. Because if your biggest complaint is, my manager is a micromanager, but you love your job, you love your salary, you love the other benefits, you love going into the office or not going into the office, whatever it is, maybe there's a way that you can start to work with your micromanager to help them understand that they don't need to do that, that you are on their team, that your job is to help make them look good, but equally, you need them to trust you in order to complete your work and see what it would take. We'll get to that in a second, in order for them to trust you. But there are ways that you can start to work through this so that you can create a job and a life that is actually going to be sustainable for you, instead of just hating your job and your life because your manager's an ass. Equally, if you have a boss that has zero boundaries around work, but you want to implement boundaries around work, well, that's something that you're going to need to do. If you're like, hey, I don't want to leave, but I also want to be able to clock off at some point and I don't want to respond to them, well, you need to start doing that. You need to start flexing the muscle and trying. Be ready to have a conversation. Be ready for them maybe to not like it. But as long as you are strong in your own convictions and willing to negotiate where negotiations make sense, then I see no problem in trying. The next is to learn their working style and communicate yours. Now, this is so undersold. If I were given any career advice when I was younger, I wish this was it. Learn your manager's working style and how to communicate with them. Understand if they're the type of manager who needs to know the who, what, when, where, why, how. Understand if they're the type of manager who loves a certain font and certain size, certain color. Understand if they're the kind of manager that prefers a presentation versus a written out email. Understand where they want to be involved and where they don't, and why. The why here is going to be so important. Many times we perceive someone as toxic instead of insecure. And honestly, you could probably swap those two words out. A toxic manager is typically an insecure manager. A toxic manager does not have the emotional intelligence needed in order to lead a team. But you know what helps with that? You learning about them. You understanding, where does this insecurity come from? What kind of pressure does this manager have on their shoulders, and how can I lighten it? Or how can I remove any pressure that I'm unknowingly adding on to them in order to make them feel more safe and secure? Now, there's a thin line between keeping your confidence and doing this for the betterment of your career and jumping through hoops and becoming their little puppy. So don't do the latter, do the former. And that's going to be dependent on who you are, who your manager is, and what you are willing to do. I have actually created a free little kit that I love to use. I use this with all of my teams, and it's a How to Work With Me guide. And I thought this would be helpful, especially for this video, because it's going to create some clarity around exactly how you expect to be worked with, boundaries that you can set with your manager, because sometimes it's easier to just give them a piece of paper that says, hey, this is who I am, this is how I like to work. Let them read through it and come back to you with questions. But it's also something that you can roll out to the rest of your team, whether or not you're a leader. It is so helpful in creating clear working guidelines. Interpersonal conflict at work, anger, resentment, all of these come from miscommunication. Use a guide like this to clear up any of that confusion and make it 10 times easier for you to actually get your work done and then be able to leave on time and go and be the human outside of work that I know we all want to be. The final thing that I will say on learn the communication style is ask questions. Frame things as a question constantly, especially if you're working with an insecure manager. Instead of sitting there and telling them what they should be doing or how you would do things differently, ask questions. Well, how come we aren't doing it this way? Well, what would you think if we were to do it this way? Sometimes toxic managers actually are intelligent. Like, they do understand the strategy that they're trying to implement and why or why not they're making a decision. They just don't feel the need to explain. Asking them the question is so helpful in giving you the information needed in order to make decisions. It's you taking the agency over your job, your career, and your role, and hopefully lightening the pressure on your shoulders. The fourth thing that I will say is find trusted individuals that you can talk to. Now, I know I said that changes probably won't be made if you go to HR or leadership and start to complain. And while that is true, it's not always true. My suggestion here is, because I've definitely made HR complaints, I've definitely talked to HR before about a manager that I have believed has shown toxic traits. Now, that's because not everyone will have the confidence to do it. And I think it's really important to be able to stand up for your team in the moments where this person is impacting the company culture. But if you feel the need to do that, my suggestion is go and find trusted individuals that you can do that with, talk to, have a brainstorm with. Don't just go and throw a meeting on a calendar with somebody and start bitching, because that is a surefire way not to earn respect in these situations. Toxic managers go low quite often. They do not do the mature thing. But unfortunately, you need to do the mature thing if you are trying to make a change, because people rarely listen when you fight fire with fire. Instead, fight fire with kindness, with openness, with a desire for the betterment of the company, for this individual that you're working with empathy. Companies don't like to put extra work on their shoulders, but they will if they truly understand the problem. And the only way that you can do that is by trying to keep some of the emotion out of it. It's not always fair. It's not always what I would like to be able to do. I'd love to be able to run in there and start bitching up a storm and say, this person sucks and I want them fired. But again, hierarchy exists for a reason. You got to do this smart. You got to keep documentation. Write everything down, especially if it's toxic to the point where you feel like there's a huge safety issue, whether psychologically or otherwise. Write it down, go to somebody you trust, and create a game plan. The final thing that you can, of course, do is leave. You do not always need to stay in a situation that is toxic or making you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. You absolutely do not need to put up with someone berating you. You do not need to put up with anger. You do not need to put up with name calling. Don't let people treat you the way you would not treat yourself. Teach people how to treat you through something like the working guide, but also stand up for what you believe in, stand up for how you should be treated, support yourself, and support your teammates. Sometimes the best thing that you can do in those situations is unfortunately leave. You deserve to work for employers who value your time and value your purpose, value your work. If you are constantly belittled in your position, it is demeaning your work abilities, it's reducing your job satisfaction, and decreasing your overall quality of life. Do not allow yourself to continue to be put in a position like that. Remember, the following things can be true. You can have a toxic manager and still be successful. You can have a great manager and still find issue with them. You can be successful and leave your job. You can have a conversation with a toxic manager and it works great and you repair your working relationship. You can also have a conversation with a toxic manager and it backfires. All of these things can be true, which is why I say you need to rely on you, your self-confidence, and your resilience. These conversations will only prove to better your own career. Don't worry about what they're doing, worry about what you're doing. You are the only one who has control, and nobody can take that away from you. If you want a little homework for this week, my first suggestion is to go and fill out that working guide. That is going to create so much more clarity for you in your working relationships, and especially with your manager. Send it out to your team or don't. Just write it out for yourself so that when someone asks you, hey, how do you work best? You've sat down and you've already thought about these things, because we can all benefit from better communication about our working styles. That brings us to the very end of today's episode. Thank you so much for being here. If you don't already follow me on TikTok or Instagram, I am Regan.Olsey on both of those channels. And if you don't subscribe, make sure you go ahead and subscribe. Do at least one of the three of those things if you are trying to improve your mental health at work. And I guarantee you, you are going to take some steps in a positive direction. Thank you so very much for being here. I will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.